232 million years ago, Earth was an unfamiliar and unforgiving sanctuary. If you were to look down upon the planet from orbit, you would not see the sapphire blue oceans and emerald continents of our modern world. There were no polar ice sheets to temper the global climate. There were no broad, temperate plains carpeted in soft grass, for flowering plants and grasses had not yet evolved. Instead, almost the entirety of Earth's continental crust had fused together into a single, monstrous landmass, the supercontinent Pangaea. Stretching from the frozen reaches of the far north to the desolate margins of the south, Pangaea was cradled by a single, fathomless body of water known as the Panthalassa Ocean. But for those living deep within the continent's heart, the ocean was nothing more than an abstract myth. Thousands of kilometers separated the interior basins from the cooling moisture of the sea. Here, at the center of the world, the land was locked in a perpetual, suffocating drought. Imagine standing on this ancient ground at midday. The horizon shimmers violently, blurred by extreme heat mirages that twist the jagged outlines of volcanic basalt ridges. The ground beneath your feet is not soft soil, but baked red mudstone and coarse sand, cracked into endless geometric patterns by millions of years of desiccating heat. The sun hangs high in a sky that is not clear blue, but a hazy, dust-laden ochre, heavy with particulate matter and greenhouse gases. During the peak of the dry season, surface temperatures routinely soar past 60 degrees Celsius. The air is so thin, dry, and scorching that every breath burns the lining of the throat. Water does not flow in rivers. It hides deep beneath dried gravel beds, or evaporates before it can touch the earth. Yet, this was not a dead world. Life had endured the catastrophic Permian-Triassic extinction 20 million years earlier, and in the crucible of this red desert, natural selection had forged a brutal, finely tuned ecosystem. Every reptile, every proto-mammal, and every plant that clung to life here was a masterpiece of biomechanical endurance. For tens of millions of years, this scorching equilibrium had stood unchallenged. But stability in geology is an illusion. Beneath the cracked crust and across the boiling skies, the ancient order was approaching an irreversible reckoning. Across the vast, undulating scrublands of Pangaea, the horizon belongs to heavy shadows. These are the undisputed rulers of the herbivore kingdom, the Dicynodonts. Among them, massive creatures like Ischigualastia and Placerias move with deliberate, rhythmic slowness. They are not dinosaurs, nor are they true reptiles. They belong to the therapsids, an ancient and resilient lineage of stem-mammals whose ancestors once dominated the planet long before the first dinosaur ever drew breath. To look upon a Dicynodont is to observe an organic fortress engineered purely for desert survival. An adult Ischigualastia weighs more than 2 metric tons, carrying a barrel-shaped torso supported by thick, column-like legs. Their skin is thick, leathery, and wrinkled. lacking sweat glands to prevent even the slightest loss of vital body moisture. Observe an elderly female at the head of the herd. She stops beside a dry, gravelly riverbed where no green vegetation has grown for months. Using her powerful spade-like forelimbs and thick, blunt claws, she begins to dig into the rock-hard sediment. Beneath the surface lie deep, swollen rhizomes and tuberous roots, dense reservoirs of starch and water stored by primitive seed ferns and horsetails. Her skull is an extraordinary piece of biological machinery. Instead of a mouth full of sharp teeth, she possesses a heavily keratinized turtle-like beak and two downward-pointing tusks. With bone-shearing force, her jaws slice through fibrous, woody plant matter that would destroy the teeth of any other animal. Her vast digestive tract ferments this tough fodder for days, wringing out every calorie and every microscopic droplet of moisture. For a Dicynodont, survival is a game of thermal momentum. Their immense bulk allows them to maintain a stable internal temperature, soaking up heat during the blistering day and radiating it slowly throughout the freezing desert nights. Within their herds, they form protective rings around their young, presenting a wall of thick muscle, bone, and tusks to any predator daring enough to approach. For over 40 million years, this evolutionary strategy had proved invincible. Dicynodonts constituted more than 80% of the large animal biomass across southern Pangaea. They were the immovable foundations of the Triassic food web, yet their greatest strength was also their fatal vulnerability. Their bodies were precision-tuned to an arid world of deep roots and seasonal drought. They were masters of the desert and prisoners of it. Where great herds roam, an absolute monarch keeps vigil. In the deep, shadowed crevasse of a red sandstone canyon, something massive remains perfectly motionless. Its scales are mottled shades of iron gray and dried clay, blending seamlessly into the sun-baked rock. This is Saurosuchus, a 7-meter-long apex predator belonging to the clade Rauisuchia. Popular culture often imagines the Triassic as the domain of early dinosaurs, but that is a historical mistake. Long before dinosaurs rose to dominance, the supreme rulers of the land were pseudosuchians, the magnificent terrestrial ancestors and cousins of modern crocodiles. Saurosuchus is an engine of pure predatory efficiency. Unlike modern lizards and crocodilians whose legs sprawl out to the sides, Rauisuchians evolved a revolutionary hip structure known as the pillar erect stance. Their pelvic bones turn downward, positioning their robust limbs directly beneath their multi-ton bodies. This anatomical masterpiece gave Saurosuchus immense advantages. It lifted its vital organs far above the searing desert ground, dramatically reducing heat absorption. More importantly, it allowed this immense carnivore to stride with long, energy-efficient steps, and when the moment called, to accelerate into an explosive, terrifying sprint. The predator's amber eyes lock onto a subadult Dicynodont that has wandered away from the safety of the herd to feed on a solitary scrub bush. Saurosuchus does not chase over long distances. It calculates. It lowers its massive head, keeping its breath shallow and silent. Then, in a fraction of a second, the stillness shatters. With explosive power generated from its muscular hindquarters, Saurosuchus launches itself across the dry riverbed. The red sand erupts behind its claws. The young Dicynodont turns to flee, but its heavy, low-slung frame cannot match the sudden fury of the strike. Within seconds, the predator closes the distance. Its massive reinforced skull, nearly a meter in length, slams into the flank of the prey. Serrated, backward curving teeth, each the size of a dagger, sink deep into muscle and bone. With a violent twist of its muscular neck, Saurosuchus crushes the spine of its quarry. The struggle is brutal, decisive, and brief. Standing over its kill, the Saurosuchian lets out a deep, resonant growl that reverberates across the canyon walls. It tears through flesh and bone with effortless superiority. Across the vast interior plains of Pangaea, there is nothing that can challenge its authority. It sits unchallenged at the summit of the Triassic world, ruling through raw power and mechanical perfection. While the Titans and Biochua fought for supremacy across the riverbeds, a vastly different kind of creature watched from the scrub. Darting between the shadows of thorny cycads is a creature no larger than a house cat, Eoraptor, slender, lithe, and weighing barely 2 kilograms. It looks fragile against the harsh backdrop of the red desert. Along with close relatives like Herrerasaurus and Pisanosaurus, these were the first true dinosaurs. In the Middle Triassic, dinosaurs were not kings. They were insignificant, marginal anomalies. They made up less than 5% of the terrestrial fauna, living precarious lives as skittish insect catchers, opportunistic fruit pickers, and scavengers who waited for Saurosuchians to finish their meals. Yet, hidden beneath the humble exterior of Eoraptor was an anatomical revolution that would one day conquer the globe. First was its locomotion. While Saurosuchians achieved an erect stance by shifting their hip sockets downward, dinosaurs perfected a fully bipedal posture. Their femur fit into a completely open hip socket, an open acetabulum, locking their legs directly beneath their center of gravity. This gave Eoraptor an agility unknown to the rest of the animal kingdom. Its long, muscular tail acted as a dynamic counterweight, allowing it to make sharp, lightning-fast turns across shifting dunes without losing momentum. Its hands, free from the burden of walking, evolved dexterous digits capable of grasping slippery prey. Second, and perhaps most extraordinary, was what lay inside their rib cages. Dinosaurs possessed a groundbreaking respiratory system inherited from their archosaur ancestors, a network of unidirectional air sacs. Unlike the lungs of mammals and stem-mammals, which expand and contract like bellows, leaving stale air trapped after each breath, the dinosaur respiratory system acted like a continuous flow loop. Oxygen-rich air traveled through the lungs in one single direction during both inhalation and exhalation. In a sweltering Triassic atmosphere, where oxygen levels fluctuated and dust choked the valleys, an Eoraptor, could extract nearly twice as much oxygen per breath as a Dicynodont of equivalent mass. Furthermore, their bones were partially hollowed out by these air sacs, dramatically reducing their skeletal weight while maintaining structural rigidity. They were light, fast, thermally resilient, and metabolically agile. For now, these gifts earned them little glory. They remained in the shadows, scuttling across the baking gravel, overlooked by the giants of the age. But they possessed the one trait that matters most when a planetary catastrophe strikes: evolutionary flexibility. Thousands of kilometers to the west, far beyond the visual horizon of the interior desert, the crust of the Earth was tearing itself apart. In a region known today as Wrangellia, an oceanic plateau situated along the volatile margins of the Pangaea plate, magma plumes from the deep mantle breached the lithosphere. This was not the localized explosion of a single cone volcano. It was a large igneous province, an apocalyptic network of tectonic fissures stretching for hundreds of kilometers. For hundreds of thousands of years, rivers of glowing flood basalt poured directly into the ocean and onto the land. Millions of cubic kilometers of molten rock turned shallow seas into boiling cauldrons of steam and acid. With this volcanic fury came an unimaginable release of volatile gases. Hundreds of gigatons of carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur dioxide were pumped relentlessly into the upper atmosphere. The chemistry of the planet's sky was rewritten. A runaway greenhouse effect took hold. Global temperatures, already high, spiked by another 4 to 6 degrees Celsius. The Pangaea Ocean became a giant thermal engine, evaporating moisture at a rate the planet had not witnessed for dozens of millions of years. High in the atmosphere, the planetary circulation cells collapsed and reorganized. Massive, continent-spanning moisture corridors formed over the steaming oceans. Titanic walls of bruised purple and ink-black clouds began their slow, deliberate march inland, pushing against the ancient high-pressure desert air masses that had kept Pangaea dry for eons. In the heart of the supercontinent, the change began with a strange, eerie quiet. The wind, usually dry and biting, grew thick, heavy, and laden with foreign humidity. The Dicynodont herds raised their blunt snouts to the sky, confused by a strange, damp scent they had never encountered in their lifetimes. The great Saurosuchus paused on its rocky perch, feeling the drop in barometric pressure vibrating through its scaly skin. High above, the ochre sky vanished, swallowed whole by an impenetrable ceiling of black storm clouds that stretched from horizon to horizon. Then, out of the gathering darkness, it fell. A single, heavy drop of water plunged thousands of meters through the hot atmosphere. It struck a grain of scorching red sand at 60 degrees Celsius. The droplet hissed, vaporizing into a tiny wisp of white steam. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then came a second drop, a hundredth, a millionth. A low, deafening roar of thunder rolled across the arid plains. A sound that had not echoed here for millions of years. The heavens opened, unleashing a violent, torrential downpour. The inhabitants of Pangaea did not know it, but this was not a brief summer storm. This was the opening breath of the Carnian Pluvial episode, a planetary deluge that would rage without pause for 2 million years. The world of fire and stone had died. The empire of the old Titans was about to drown. And in the mud of the new world, a new dynasty was waiting to be born. For 2 million years, the sky forgot how to clear. What had begun as a sporadic succession of violent, localized storms gradually locked into an unbroken planetary monsoon. Across the western horizons of Pangaea, the rift zones of Wrangellia continued to bleed molten basalt into the sea, injecting relentless plumes of carbon dioxide, sulfur, and halogen gases into the stratosphere. The global thermal engine had been pushed past an irreversible threshold. The colossal Panthalassa Ocean, superheated by greenhouse forcing, was evaporating with industrial fury, lifting trillions of metric tons of water vapor into the upper atmosphere day after day, century after century. The planetary wind systems, once defined by stable Hadley cells that maintain the vast desert interior, completely collapsed. In their place arose massive atmospheric rivers, corridors of saturated, turbulent air, thousands of kilometers wide, that funneled oceanic moisture straight into the heart of the supercontinent. The high-pressure systems that had guarded Pangaea's arid interior for 50 million years shattered under the weight of incoming cyclonic supercells. The red land, unaccustomed to liquid water, possessed no natural defenses against the deluge. For countless generations, the interior basins had been blanketed by fine volcanic dust, loose gravel, and desiccated clay. In the opening decades of the Carnian Pluvial episode, this ancient crust absorbed water until it reached catastrophic liquefaction. Deep beneath the surface, ancient salt deposits dissolved, destabilizing entire geological formations. Vast alluvial fans turned into churning rivers of red mud, carving deep, violent canyons through mountains that had stood undisturbed since the Permian. Imagine standing on what had once been the iron furnace of the Central Plains. The blistering 60-degree heat mirages are gone, replaced by a perpetual, suffocating gray twilight. The sun is an invisible memory behind a ceiling of bruised, slate-colored clouds that extends from pole to pole. The air is no longer dry and thin. It is heavy, cold, and laden with the sharp, acidic bite of sulfuric rain. The silence of the ancient desert has been replaced by a deafening, ceaseless roar, the sound of trillions of raindrops hammering into saturated stone, accompanied by the low, continuous rumble of distant thunder that never truly fades. Ancient riverbeds that had remained bone-dry for millions of years were resurrected as violent, silt-choked torrents miles across. These flash floods swept through the lowlands with unstoppable kinetic energy, tearing ancient cycads from their roots and sweeping away centuries of accumulated topsoil. The red desert was dissolving into a continent-spanning, waterlogged labyrinth of swollen waterways, mud flats, and rotting mudstone. For the species that had perfected the art of surviving drought, the rules of existence had changed overnight. the world had not merely grown wet, it had become an inescapable liquid trap. Across the drowning plains of southern Pangaea, the titans of the old world were beginning to starve in the midst of water. For more than 40 million years, the Dicynodonts had anchored the terrestrial food web through one supreme evolutionary specialization: their mastery of subterranean plant matter. Their entire anatomical architecture, their downward-pointing tusks, their horny keratinized beaks, their immense muscular shoulders, had evolved to harvest the deep, water-rich tubers, rhizomes, and lignified roots of seed ferns buried beneath arid gravel. Now, that very specialization became their evolutionary tomb. As the rains fell without pause, the groundwater tables of Pangaea rose rapidly, suffocating the subterranean ecosystems. Soil that had remained dry for epochs became completely anoxic, deprived of all oxygen. Unable to breathe, the vast underground root networks of dicroidium and ancient seed ferns died where they sat. Within months, billions of tons of starch-rich tubers dissolved into putrid, black, toxic slime beneath the waterlogged mud. Observe an adult Ishigualastia standing in the pouring rain. Her leathery, wrinkled hide is soaked through, glistening under the dim gray light. She lowers her massive, blunt head and uses her tusks to dig into the ground, driven by millions of years of instinct. But instead of the hard, satisfying crunch of nutritious, water-storing tubers, her beak dredges up only foul, fermented mud and decaying plant mush. She moves forward, searching for uncorrupted ground, but every step is an agonizing drain on her remaining energy reserves. An adult Dicynodont weighs over 2 metric tons. In an arid landscape of hard-packed gravel and baked clay, their broad, blunt feet functioned like sturdy columns, distributing their weight efficiently across the solid earth. But in this saturated new world, the ground has zero bearing strength. With every single step, her heavy legs plunge knee-deep into thick, viscous clay. The physics of mud are brutal to the heavy. To lift a 2-ton body out of suction-heavy mire requires massive muscular exertion. Every 100 meters of travel burns through precious calories that cannot be replaced. Her barrel-shaped torso drags through the sludge, creating deep furrows in the earth. Surrounding her, younger members of the herd struggle even worse. Calves become immobilized in mud pits, their small muscles burning until exhaustion claims them. Compounding this mechanical nightmare is the thermal reality of the storm. Dicynodonts are stem mammals with leathery, hairless skin designed to radiate immense heat away from their cores under a searing desert sun. They possess no dense fur, no thick layer of subcutaneous blubber, and no water-repellent plumage. Under the relentless assault of cold, acidic rain, their large surface area works against them, conducting core heat outward into the damp air at an alarming rate. Chronic hypothermia sets in. Their metabolic rate slows, dulling their senses and freezing their limbs into stiff, painful lethargy. The massive defensive rings that once protected these gentle giants from predators begin to disintegrate. Herds fracture into small, desperate bands of emaciated wanderers, their ribs pressing visibly against their soggy, graying hides. The immovable pillars of the Triassic were crumbling from the inside out. They had survived the greatest mass extinction in Earth's history, but they could not survive the rotting of the Earth beneath their feet. In the flooded canyons and slick mud deltas, the apex rulers of Pangaea were discovering that absolute strength means nothing when the ground itself betrays you. For 10 million years, Saurosuchus and its fellow Saurosuchians had reigned supreme across the terrestrial biosphere. They were the ultimate expression of Archosaurian carnivory. 7 meters of solid muscle, armored scutes, and bone-crushing jaws, engineered specifically for high-speed ambush across open, firm terrain. Their erect, pillar-like limb posture had given them unprecedented speed and height in the arid world. Yet, as the Carnian Pluvial episode deepened, this biomechanical perfection proved fatally rigid. The predatory strategy of Saurosuchus relied entirely on acoustic stealth, followed by explosive short-range acceleration. But stealth is impossible in a world covered in standing water and deep mud. Every movement of a 4-ton carnivore through a waterlogged flood basin produces loud splashing and heavy vibrations that telegraph its approach across vast distances. Worse still was the issue of traction. The pillar-erect hip of the Saurosuchians, while brilliant for vertical load-bearing on solid ground, lacked lateral flexibility. When a Saurosuchus attempted to launch an explosive charge across slick, clay-saturated riverbanks, its claws found no purchase. Its feet slipped on the greasy mud, twisting its rigid hip joints and sending the multi-ton predator crashing onto its side in the silt. At the same time, their prey base was evaporating. The colossal Dicynodont herds were not dying in convenient hunting grounds. They were succumbing to starvation and hypothermia in remote flooded sinkholes, their carcasses rapidly swept away by raging alluvial torrents or buried deep under feet of river mud before carnivores could feed. The easy, abundant meals of the Middle Triassic were gone. Starvation drove the great pseudosuchians into desperate, violent competition. In the persistent twilight of the monsoon, massive adult Saurosuchus converged on the few remaining strips of elevated rocky ground. Territorial disputes, once resolved through posturing and low-frequency vocalizations, escalated into cannibalistic frenzy. Starving giants clashed in the pouring rain, their dagger-like teeth tearing through scutes and snapping leg bones. Even for the victors of these battles, survival was fleeting. In the hot, dry world of the past, wounds baked clean in the solar heat and healed over thick scars. In the perpetually damp, warm-temperate greenhouse of the Carnian, the air and water teemed with waterborne bacteria, fungal spores, and parasitic microorganisms. Open bite wounds became necrotic within days. Fungal infections spread rapidly across their waterlogged scutes, eating into their living tissue and poisoning their bloodstreams. One by one, the monarchs of the Triassic collapsed along the rising riverbanks. Their heavy fossilized remains were quickly enveloped by layers of fine silt and clay, preserved as silent monuments to a fallen dynasty. They had not been outfought by faster predators, nor outsmarted by cleverer rivals. They were brought down by the sheer, unyielding weight of an environment that had outpaced their ability to adapt. While the ancient megafauna collapsed into extinction, the plant kingdom was undergoing one of the most radical, violent transformations in the history of the terrestrial biosphere. The flora of the Middle Triassic had been a landscape of low diversity and hard-won resilience. Dominated by seed ferns of the Dicroidium flora, tough-fronded cycadioids, and specialized desert conifers, these plants were adapted to conserve every drop of moisture, storing water in thick, fleshy roots and coating their small leaves in thick, waxy cuticles. As the 2-million-year deluge saturated the continents, this entire floral regime collapsed on a global scale. Deprived of oxygen in waterlogged soils, the ancient seed ferns died off en masse. In their wake, the continents were recolonized by aggressive, moisture-loving floral opportunists that transformed the landscape from a dry, open scrubland into an impenetrable, towering, temperate rainforest. Vast forests of hygraphitic conifers, ancestors of modern araucarians, Chirolepidiaceae, and giant podocarps, surged across the newly created alluvial plains. These primitive trees grew with unprecedented speed, fueled by atmospheric carbon dioxide levels that exceeded 2,000 parts per million and an endless supply of water. They pushed their canopies 30, 40, and 50 meters into the mist-choked sky, creating the first true multi-layered forest canopies the Earth had seen in tens of millions of years. Beneath these colossal trees, the forest floor transformed into a tangled, shadowed understory. Dense thickets of gigantic horsetails, equistites, grew several meters tall, their ribbed hollow green stems forming dense, vertical palisades along swollen riverbanks. Spore-bearing tree ferns and primitive mosses carpeted every square inch of exposed soil and fallen timber, creating a deep, sponge-like forest floor that trapped moisture and prevented the earth from ever drying out. This floral revolution fundamentally broke the ecological bridge between the past and the future. The new plants were not merely taller, they were chemically armed. The leaves of these new canopy conifers were tough, fibrous needles heavily impregnated with unpalatable terpenes, acidic resins, and abrasive silica crystals. To digest such material required either a specialized high-capacity gizzard filled with grinding stones or an entirely new kind of digestive fermentation system. The surviving low-browsing herbivores, equipped only with blunt beaks designed to pull roots from dirt, were ecologically blind in this vertical forest. The nutritious foliage was suspended dozens of meters in the air, completely out of reach. Below, the forest floor was filled with chemical defenses and toxic spores. The plant world had built a cathedral of green, but it was a cathedral that barred entry to the old titans. The stage was cleared for a creature that did not look down into the dirt, but upward into the canopy. In the shadows of this drenched, towering cathedral, the small and the marginal found their moment of destiny, while the multi-ton Saurosuchians slipped into the mud and the Dicynodonts starved in the rotting scrub. The earliest dinosaurs were undergoing an explosive, unprecedented radiation. Species like Eoraptor, Herrerasaurus, Sanjuansaurus, and the early sauropodomorphs, like Pangaea, were no longer timid scavengers darting along the edges of the world. They were the architects of a biological revolution. Every anatomical novelty they had evolved in the desert furnace suddenly revealed itself as a decisive superpower in the rain. Consider their locomotion. Weighing only 10 to 30 kilograms, an early dinosaur exerted minimal pressure on the ground. Their fully open hip sockets and bipedal digitigrade stance, walking high on their toes like birds, allowed them to distribute their light weight with incredible efficiency. While a Saurosuchus became bogged down in seconds, an Eoraptor could sprint lightly across saturated moss beds, leaping effortlessly over fallen logs and navigating treacherous mud deltas without breaking stride. Their long, ossified tails acted as dynamic balancing rods, allowing them to make sharp, instantaneous adjustments in direction across slippery terrain. If an early dinosaur lost its footing on a wet riverbank, its grasping hands could catch branches and roots, stabilizing its body before it fell. Furthermore, their lightweight, air-filled bones gave them an unmatched strength-to-weight ratio. Inside their skeletal frames, the unidirectional respiratory system operated with peak efficiency. The humid, dense, low-altitude air of the Carnian greenhouse was rich in moisture, but prone to oxygen stratification. The avian-like air sacs of the dinosaurs pumped air through their rigid lungs in a continuous flow, extracting maximum oxygen with every breath and supplying their hyperactive muscles with unending energy. While cold-blooded pseudosuchians grew lethargic in the damp chill, dinosaurs remained energetic, active, and warm. Covering their slender bodies was another evolutionary masterstroke. Simple, filamentous proto-feathers. These thin, hair-like structures were not designed for flight, but for thermal insulation. Like a waterproof down jacket, these filaments trapped a layer of warm air directly against their skin, repelling the cold, acidic rain and preserving their internal core body temperature. While the giant stem mammals froze to death in the open, the feathered dinosaurs thrived in the cold, damp understory. Their dietary flexibility completed their triumph. Unlike the hyper-specialized Dicynodonts, early dinosaurs were consummate opportunists. Their heterodont teeth, some pointed for shearing, some leaf-shaped for grinding, allowed them to switch diets on a weekly basis. When insects flourished in the rotting wood, they hunted insects. When the new conifers dropped nutrient-rich seed cones, they consumed seeds. When small reptiles and amphibians gathered in swollen ponds, they hunted meat. As the 2 million years of the Carnian Pluvial episode drew toward their close, the volcanic fires of Wrangellia began to cool. The atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide slowly receded, and the unbroken storm clouds began to fracture. For the first time in 2 million years, rays of golden sunlight pierced the haze, illuminating a planet transformed beyond recognition. The vast red deserts of Pangaea were gone forever, replaced by endless, lush forests of conifer and fern stretching from horizon to horizon. The heavy footprints of the Dicynodonts and the bone-crushing jaws of the Saurosuchians were nowhere to be seen, entombed forever in the deep strata of river silt. Standing atop a fallen conifer trunk, a young dinosaur lifts its head toward the warm sun, its feathers dry in the gentle breeze. Around it, the forest is alive with the calls of its kin. The old kings are dead, drowned in the mud of the great Deluge. And upon their graves, the dynasty of the dinosaurs has begun. When the 2 million year deluge finally broke, it revealed a planet that had been entirely rebuilt from the bedrock up. Across the vast continental expanse of Pangaea, the endless red dust plains and sterile salt flats were gone. In their place stretched a boundless, interconnected wilderness of colossal conifer forests, towering horsetail wetlands, and fertile alluvial river valleys. The trillions of tons of volcanic ash and river silt deposited during the Carnian Pluvial episode had created a deep, hyper-fertile topsoil layer that fueled an explosion of plant life unprecedented in the history of the terrestrial biosphere. The atmosphere had stabilized into a warm, oxygen-rich greenhouse. The collapse of the old desert order left the global ecosystem fundamentally empty. More than 80% of the ancient megafauna, the heavy-bodied Dicynodonts, the armored etosaurs, and the multi-ton Saurosuchians had been swept away, their specialized bodies unable to endure the mud, cold, and rot of the great storm. In the history of life on Earth, rarely had so many ecological niches been left completely vacant at a single moment. For the surviving dinosaurs, this was not merely a chance to recover. It was an open invitation to colonize an entire planet. Across every biome, from the misty equatorial deltas to the temperate high-latitude valleys, the descendants of Eoraptor and Herrerasaurus were undergoing an explosive adaptive radiation. No longer forced to hide in the shadows or scuttle beneath the feet of giant predators, they stepped boldly into the daylight. Their lightweight, hollow-boned skeletons, high metabolic rates, and superior bipedal agility allowed them to disperse across Pangaea with astonishing speed. Because the supercontinent remained a single, contiguous landmass, there were no ocean barriers to halt their advance. Within a few million years, dinosaur footprints were pressed into the mud of every corner of the globe. A new biological order was taking root. The age of trial and error was over. The stage was set for the greatest evolutionary expansion the Earth had ever witnessed. In the newly formed temperate rainforests of the late Triassic, a revolution of scale was taking place. While early dinosaurs had been small, agile bipeds, a distinct evolutionary lineage began to explore an entirely new biomechanical frontier: gigantism. These were the sauropodomorphs, the early cousins and direct ancestors of the colossal long-necked sauropods that would one day define the Jurassic. Among them, Plateosaurus stood as the undisputed pioneer of this new era. Measuring up to 10 meters in length and weighing over 4 metric tons, Plateosaurus was the first creature in Earth's history to achieve true mega-herbivore status through vertical browsing. While the heavy Dicynodonts of the past had spent 40 million years with their heads pinned to the ground digging for roots, Plateosaurus evolved a long, flexible neck composed of elongated cervical vertebrae. This anatomical marvel allowed it to harvest lush conifer foliage, seed cones, and tree fern crowns suspended 5 to 6 meters in the air. To support this massive energetic intake, Plateosaurus evolved a digestive system of unprecedented efficiency. Because their slender heads and pencil-like teeth were incapable of chewing tough conifer needles, they swallowed smooth river stones known as gastroliths. Stored inside a massive muscular gizzard, these stones churned continuously with every movement of the animal, pulverizing tough fibrous plant matter into a fine pulp before it entered an immense fermentation chamber. Their locomotion was an engineering triumph of hybrid versatility. On open ground, Plateosaurus could drop onto all fours to graze on low horsetail carpets. But when reaching for the high canopy or sensing danger, its powerful hind limbs and robust pelvic girdle allowed it to rear effortlessly onto 2 legs. Its heavy muscular tail acted as a third leg of a dynamic tripod, anchoring its massive body securely to the ground while its flexible neck swept through the treetops. Herds of Plateosaurus, hundreds of individuals strong, now moved across the fertile valleys of Pangaea. Their deep, resonant rumbles vibrated through the forest understory, a living wall of muscle and bone moving with grace and purpose. For the first time since the Carnian storm, the plant world had met an herbivore that could conquer the vertical architecture of the forest canopy. The long-necked titans had claimed the earth. Where giants gather, predators must evolve to hunt them. The extinction of Saurosuchus and the apex Saurosuchians had left the summit of the food chain completely unoccupied. Into this void stepped the theropods, a lineage of hyper-specialized bipedal carnivores built for speed, precision, and relentless pursuit. Leading this predatory vanguard was Liliensternus and the pack-hunting Conifers. Measuring over 5 meters in length, Liliensternus was an athletic nightmare of predatory engineering. Unlike the heavy, plodding Saurosuchians that relied on short-range ambushes, Liliensternus possessed long, slender legs built for sustained high-speed pursuit. Its femur and tibia were aligned in a rigid, forward-facing axis, and its digitigrade feet acted like biological springs, allowing it to sprint across uneven ground and muddy floodplains with effortless balance. Its skull was a masterpiece of kinetic lethality. Lightweight and perforated with large cranial openings known as fenestrae, the skull reduced weight without sacrificing structural integrity. Lined within its jaws were dozens of xiphodont teeth, backward curving blade-like daggers edged with microscopic serrations. These teeth were not designed to crush bone through blunt brute force, They were precision-slicing instruments engineered to inflict catastrophic blood loss and deep muscle trauma with high-speed slash-and bites. Observe a hunting party of Conifers tracking a juvenile Plateosaurus through a dense conifer grove. They do not charge headlong into danger. They communicate through subtle body language, high-frequency vocalizations, and coordinated flanking maneuvers. Their stereoscopic vision and enlarged optic lobes grant them acute depth perception, tracking every twitch of their quarry through the mist. When they strike, it is a display of lethal coordination. One individual darts across the prey's field of vision, drawing its attention, while two others sweep in from the flanks. Their grasping three-fingered hands, armed with sharp, recurved talons, latch onto the flank of the young herbivore. With rapid, repetitive strikes, they deliver precise lacerations, then disengage and circle out of reach of the thrashing tail. They do not need to wrestle their prey to the ground. They let hemorrhagic shock and exhaustion do the work. Within minutes, the struggle is decided. The pack moves in with surgical efficiency, feeding rapidly before larger theropods can arrive. Across the continents, the rules of predation had been entirely rewritten. The slow, armored ambushers of the past were gone forever, replaced by fast, intelligent, warm-blooded hunters that dominated through stamina, vision, and deadly speed. For 20 million years, the dinosaurs expanded across the lush landscapes of the late Triassic. But Earth's geological restlessness was far from finished. At the boundary between the Triassic and Jurassic periods, approximately 201 million years ago, the supercontinent of Pangaea began to fracture along its central seam. The opening of the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, known to science as CAMP, triggered the most violent volcanic eruption in the planet's history. Over hundreds of thousands of years, 4 distinct pulses of flood basalt poured across 11 million square kilometers of land. Massive plumes of sulfur dioxide and ash were injected directly into the upper stratosphere. But this time, the climatic consequence was not a warm, wet deluge. The dense volcanic aerosols reflected solar radiation back into space, plunging the planet into a series of catastrophic volcanic winters. Decades-long periods of bitter, sub-zero cold and polar ice formation that extended far into the equatorial zones. For the remaining archaic reptiles and cold-blooded pseudosuchians that had barely survived the Carnian storm, this sudden, freezing darkness was the final death blow. Lacking insulation, their body temperatures plummeted. Their metabolic systems shut down, freezing them in their burrows and along frozen river margins. The last of the ancient crocodilian cousins that had once ruled the Triassic were wiped from the terrestrial world forever. Yet, amidst the frozen ash and bitter frost, the dinosaurs barely faltered. Their ancient evolutionary inheritance, the simple, filamentous proto-feathers that had kept them warm during the Carnian rains, now served as an impenetrable shield against the volcanic winter. Trapping air against their bodies, these plumage coats retained core body heat, even as temperatures dropped below freezing. Their unidirectional air sac respiratory systems efficiently filtered the cold, ash-laden air, while their high metabolic engines generated continuous internal warmth. While other lineages perished in the freezing dark, feathered dinosaurs roamed the frosted conifer forests, feeding on frozen carcasses and hardy winter vegetation. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction was one of the 5 greatest mass die-offs in the history of the Earth. It eliminated more than 75% of all marine and terrestrial species. And when the ash clouds finally cleared, the dinosaurs were the only major terrestrial vertebrates left standing. With the dawn of the Jurassic period, the Earth entered a golden age that would endure for 150 million years. Every competitor had been cleared from the board. Every continent, every valley, and every canopy belonged entirely to the dinosaurian lineage. What had begun as a desperate scramble for survival in the mud of the Carnian Pluvial episode had culminated in the most absolute biological dominance the terrestrial world has ever seen. In the lush, sunlit plains of the early Jurassic, the descendants of the Triassic survivors were already reaching staggering proportions. The sauropodomorphs were evolving into the true sauropods, colossal long-necked leviathans like Volcanodon and Barapasaurus, creatures that would soon weigh 20, 40, and 60 metric tons. As they strode across the conifer woodlands, the very ground trembled beneath their pillar-like feet, scattering ancient fern spores into the golden morning air. Beneath the towering canopy, armored thyreophorans, the ancestors of Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurus, grazed on cycad thickets, their backs lined with defensive plates and sharp spikes. High in the canopy, primitive pterosaurs soared between the conifer crowns, while agile, feathered coelurosaurs hunted through the undergrowth. Dinosaurs had conquered every ecological niche on the planet. They walked across polar snowfields insulated by thick plumage. They dominated equatorial river deltas through sheer size. They colonized island archipelagos, barren highlands, and humid coastal swamps. From the smallest insect hunter to the largest land animal ever to draw breath, their anatomical architecture, hollow bones, continuous airflow respiration, and bipedal kinetic freedom proved to be the most versatile biological design ever conceived by natural selection. Imagine looking down upon the Earth 200 million years ago. The world is green, vibrant, and alive with the deep, rumbling vocalizations of 1,000 titans. The red desert furnace of Pangaea is an ancient, buried memory. The 2-million-year storm has long since passed, but its legacy is written into the living fabric of the planet. It was the rain that broke the empire of the ancient kings. It was the mud that swallowed their armored legions. And it was in the crucible of that eternal deluge that the greatest dynasty in Earth's history was forged. The storm had ended. The reign of the dinosaurs had begun.